Good afternoon, everybody. Here with Paul and Josh, as usual, and Commissioner James Ravella, our Commissioner of Public Safety. There are some public safety issues that we will be addressing in a few minutes. But I wanted to start off, as is our norm, talking about our current COVID daily summary. A lot's going on in the last week, but it is worth remembering that we are in the midst of the worst pandemic ever to hit our state and this country. And it still requires focus to make sure that we're safe on the back end. The numbers are sort of interesting. Tests performed up a lot, but there was some bunching going on from a few days. Number of positive cases, about 6.5%. So that number is, relatively low over the last period of time. Fatalities, 20. Currently hospitalized, down 27. You can see in the next chart, again, the overall hospitalizations. I know we wanted to talk about this some more. You can see we got up to about 2,000 back April 20th or so, and today we're down at less than 500. So you can see we're down 75%. That speaks to capacity, and that speaks to the fact that we're getting this slowly under control, thanks to a lot of you. Next chart, please. A lot of people have said, hey, let's break out the admissions and discharges. So Josh helped put this together. Since the start of this pandemic, we've had about 9,559 admissions, 7,124 of discharge. So that is, what is that? 3/4 plus. Go to the hospital, come out safely. 1981, 1,981 poor souls are not with us any longer who had been hospitalized. And the small number, 454, are still COVID-related hospitalizations. Next chart, I think, is something that keeps coming up. Who should get tested? Can I get tested? How does that work? Well, one, anyone with symptoms gets tested, no questions asked. Anyone who's had close contact with someone who tested positive, get tested or self-quarantine. That's part of what contact tracing is all about. We'll let you know if you've been in contact with somebody who tested positive. We'll make sure you can get a test accordingly. Asymptomatic testing, we're branching that out and filling that out over a period of time. Nursing home and assisted living staff. We've now got the test kits in every single nursing home, taking care of all the patients who are there. And we're doing the executive order this evening, which says every single nurse and staff at the nursing homes will be tested now, and they'll be tested on a regular basis going forward. One of the first states, if not the first state in the country, to be able to do that. Correctional facility staff and offenders. So we started doing that. Most of the offenders have been tested. Staff will be tested again on a regular basis going forward. And our highest risk urban communities. We've spent a lot of time talking about how we're taking the mobile testing, the pop-up testing to the communities. Take the test to you. Doing everything we can, working with the ministers and others in the community with a trust factor to make sure we want you to get tested. It's for your public health, and it's for the safety of all those around you. That's true of the congregate settings as well. High-risk healthcare workers and first responders. Again, we're making sure that you're safe and everybody you come into contact with is safe as well. And that's all part of our testing that has ramped up dramatically over the last 3 weeks. It's sort of key to our phase 2, which starts in and around June 20th, as soon as we start getting up towards 100,000 tests a week. Obviously, we also have to talk about George Floyd and his tragic killing and what has gone on in this state and around our country over the last almost 7 days now. When I found out about the killing, we had a call with the Black and Puerto Rican caucus the next day. And I said one of the things that struck me was the police were surrounded by white policemen. And George Floyd was an African-American, yet another tragic killing of an African-American. And I told the Black and Puerto Rican caucus, I need their help. We have to do a better job of recruiting state police who reflect the diversity of the community. You know the emphasis we have made in terms of having an administration that reflects our amazing state and all of its diversity, so people can look at their state government, look at their state police and say, that's somebody who understands me. We've obviously made a big emphasis in terms of recruiting of teachers as well, and making a special emphasis now in terms of judges. And that's what we talked about with the Black and Hispanic Caucus. A couple of days later, you remember we got together with members of the faith community. You know, originally we were going to be there talking about how we're opening up our churches, mosques, synagogues, houses of worship, and slowly getting back to a sense of normal with a big emphasis upon the outside. But as you can imagine, all the faith communities were there, locked arms, just by the tragedy of George Floyd's murder. And we spoke with one voice, and it just reminded me that the message going into the COVID crisis, we're all in this together, and I loved having the faith community there reflecting that same sentiment. You know, then we did know that they were starting to see demonstrations around the country and even in our state. So that's when, you know, Commissioner Ravella and I started talking about Connecticut and what we should do in order to make sure people knew we heard their voices and the power of their message, and yet we also maintain the public safety and peace and community that makes Connecticut special. And, you know, I was just struck by the nature of our police chiefs over that period of time. I was on with Fernando Spagnolo, the Waterbury police chief, and he was there, you know, high-fiving one of the demonstrators, which is pictured. You probably saw the police chief in Stanford took a bended knee in sympathy with all those who felt for George Floyd, his family, and all that that murder represented. I did a short tweet just referencing the fact that the police chief in Bridgeport had said, hey, look, I understand the sentiment and grief you are fighting for as part of these protests. And that's and I'd be marching with you as well, but I'm here keeping the peace. And that's the sense of mutual respect that really struck me as we started this long weekend. And it could have been, I saw violence, I saw outbreak, I saw looting going on in other parts of the country, in other big cities in the country. And so far, thankfully, Commissioner, we have not seen that violence. We have not seen that looting here. Overall, very peaceful, a diverse group of people, men and women, black, white, Hispanic, all in this together for something bigger than themselves. And I just hope to God we can maintain that sense of respect and peace that is so key. But I worry. I worry now. I was on the video conference with President Trump and Secretary of Defense and his Attorney General, and they had a very different message. They said, what's the matter with you governors? How come you're not out there, showing these guys who's boss? If you don't run over, you're going to get run over. How come you're not using the guard? How come you're not arresting more people? How come you're not, quote, dominating the battlefield? And that was the message they said, which is the opposite of what we've been trying to do here in Connecticut as we reach out to our community and work through the meaning of George Floyd's life and sudden death together and what that means. We talked about that a little bit this afternoon with Neil O'Leary and the religious leaders and the chief of police in Waterbury. Waterbury, as you know, there were some demonstrations. They briefly tied up the highways. But I was just so moved by the sense of community there. And I was really moved by the ministers, the legislators, and the police working together from a position of respect. And one of the people that was there on our Zoom meeting talking about Waterbury is our Congresswoman Jahana Hayes. And I wanted her just to say a few things about what we've learned from the George Floyd death and what we can do better. And I think she's an ideal person to give voice to what people are feeling right now. Obviously, she knows something about teaching, and she believes in kids. Her husband is a cop in Waterbury, and he knows what's going on. And he was also afflicted with COVID, and now he's back. And I think nobody can speak to the sentiments of what the police are trying to do and what the families are feeling than Johanna. Could you just talk for a couple of minutes, Johanna, about what you heard?
Well, thank you, Governor Lamont, for inviting me to be a part of this press conference. I don't think that I can solve the problem or answer those questions, but I do have a very unique perspective because I am the congresswoman for this district. I also grew up in Waterbury, educated all of my children here, was born and raised. But first and foremost, I am a mother. You know, my husband is a police officer, but first and foremost, he is a father. And I'm a Black woman and he's a Black man. And the events of the last couple days have been deeply painful. Things that we have dealt with in our lifetime, in our community, far too often. I think what we saw play out on live TV, which I would equate not just to murder, but we witnessed an execution, if you will, because we watched the life drain out of George Floyd while he lay on the ground. And we watched other police officers stand by. And that is unacceptable. My condolences to the Floyd family. My heart goes out to his family, but it was just a painful reminder of, you hear a lot about the conversation that Black families have with their children. That doesn't just apply to children. My husband's almost 25 years in law enforcement and on the force, and he knows if we were to get pulled over, he puts his hands on the steering wheel, he turns on the interior light, and he tries to let the officer know that I am carrying a firearm and I am law enforcement, because in the 5 seconds it would take for him to say that, he doesn't want his sidearm to be noticed and a confrontation ensue. We need to have some honest conversations. I've seen what happened in the city. We see protests all over the country. And I think what the frustration is that we're seeing is that for many of these young people, I mean, they're from a different generation, so they don't remember the civil rights movement. They never experienced Dr. King. But what they did experience was when one of their contemporaries took a knee in protest, they were told that's not the right way to protest. So it's almost you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And young people are looking for an outlet and they're looking to be heard. And I think that it is our responsibilities to hear people, to not try to explain away their concerns or tell them what they feel or why they should be feeling this, but just to sit and listen. Many educators are struggling as students are asking questions. And what I would say is, if this is the first time you're having those conversations, then you're not doing your job properly. We should be introducing diverse literature and alternative perspectives and allowing students to ask questions. If I were in the classroom, I would have went in my room today, shut the door and said, let's talk about it. Ask any question you want. Let's open up a dialogue. And while students were doing that back and forth, I would have wrote things down on the board. And then I would have said, okay, now let's go back and talk about these things one by one and create a space that was safe for them to express their ideas, their opinions, their concerns, and just begin to engage. That's what needs to be happening in our community. I hear people say, well, this doesn't happen here and my community is safe and our police department is doing a great job. And all of those things are correct. But there are people in our communities who do not feel safe. And we need to hear them and begin to address those things. I watched my husband struggle on Sunday as our boys came over. I have two boys in their 20s and they're getting in their cars ready to leave. And my husband has on his uniform and he's getting ready to go to work to police in the community where he was born and raised. And those conflicting dynamics where either you are Black and law enforcement is against you, or you are law enforcement and you are against the Black community. I know those things are not true because they reside in my home. And the actions of those officers made my husband and all of the other police officers, the good police officers who stand up and protect and serve our communities, less safe. And this idea that there's a few bad apples, this is a profession where there is no room for a few bad apples. We would if the airline said we only have a few bad pilots, we would never accept that. So there needs to be accountability. It has to start at the top, whether it be the president, the governor, the mayor. We have to have people and leaders in our community who believe that all people have value and begin to institute programs and policies that allow a space for those dynamics to occur. This has been a painful week, but so many people have reached out. What can we do different? How can we engage? Not everybody's going to protest. And that's not the only way to make your voice heard. On Sunday, I did not attend a protest, but I did go to church and I worshiped, and my praise was my protest because I prayed for healing for this country and healing for my community. And then I went back to find legislation, to reach out to my colleagues. What can I do from the perch that I am sitting at? And I think everybody has the ability to do that. I'll just finish up by saying, when I used to teach my students about the Montgomery bus boycott, we would talk about, everybody knows that one, that's a good, the start of the civil rights movement. But not everybody showed up and protested. Some people said, I choose not to spend money in this establishment. Other people sent shoes and bicycles. Other people typed up flyers and sent them out. Other people gave people rides back and forth. So everybody contributed in a different way. And I want to remind people that protest is not the only way to engage in this conversation. And the one thing that we all have control over is our actions. Put yourself in proximity to these communities. Talk to people. Get to know people. Brian Stevenson talks a lot about proximity. And until you get close enough to people to hear them, to listen to them, to go out into their communities, you can't begin to understand the problems that they're dealing with. And I just think that all of the conversations that are starting are a very good starting point to say, although we can't change everything that has happened in the past, but we can learn from those lessons and work together to move forward.
Thank you, Johanna. I just say I've got a son, Andy and I have a son, Teddy, in his 20s, and I never thought to tell him to keep your hands on the steering wheel when you get stopped. And we're all working for a day where everybody knows the police are there to protect them and keep them safe, and we won't have to give a special warning. Max?
NBC Connecticut.
Hi, Governor Matt Austin with NBC Connecticut. I know a lot of the communities where these protests are taking place were also badly hit by COVID. How do you see that dynamic, and are you concerned about mask use and that we could see other spikes coming up?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. That is, a lot of the demonstrations are also happening in cities where the COVID infection rate was highest. Again, it's just ironic that if you're African American, the healthcare disparities are most severe. You're much more likely to get COVID and much more likely to suffer complications. It's brutal. And as I look at the protesters, James, maybe you've seen this as well, I do think most of the people are wearing masks. I hope that's true, and because we got to be able to do two things at the same time: fight for justice and defeat COVID.
But Governor, I'll just say also, that was one of the things that I was deeply concerned about, is that we have even when we talk about the civil rights movement, never before have we seen, people are comparing what's happening in our country to the summer of '67, where there were riots and protests all over the country. This is the first time in our history where that has happened at the same time as we're dealing with the pandemic. And I hope people do not lose sight of that. I am deeply concerned because, as you mentioned at the top of the program, my husband was diagnosed, impacted by COVID. So I saw firsthand how scary this virus can be. And I just encourage people, there's other ways to get involved. I mean, right now, you and I are in 2 locations facilitating a conversation, but just like we're shifting and finding ways to do other things differently, I think all of the people who are concerned about their community and want to voice their opinions and contribute to this conversation have to be creative about that, what that looks like, because what we cannot have is more death in our community as a result of COVID-19, because we saw already that the Black community was disproportionately impacted, with 1 in 3 people who were hospitalized or died identifying as Black. So this, and then people in large gatherings, then going back to their homes, all of the things that we've worked over the last 3 months to try to kind of undergird our communities. Yesterday, I was very concerned about what was happening for that reason. I do not want to see another surge.
Thank you. Keep us moving here, Max.
News 8.
Good afternoon, everyone. Governor, I was going to ask you the same question, but now to your teleconference with the president today, and I think you said that the message from him was opposite with respect to what we're trying to do here. How concerning is that? And then how do you move forward in terms of how we police these protests, given the message that you received from the president?
Well, I'll start, and then maybe Commissioner Revelle can help me out on this. But the philosophy that he's described to me, which I think is working, is we're starting from a position of mutual trust and mutual understanding. And what the provocateurs are trying to do, those coming from the right or those coming from the left, is to create a confrontation. And they want to get arrested, and they want to make sure that the police have something that's very energizing. And I've just been really, and I just think that the president's admonition that turn this into a military-type situation, it just pours gasoline on the flames. That's the wrong thing to do. I like the way our police are working with the community, working with the protest leaders, making sure their voices are heard in a respectful way. James, you want to add to that?
Yes, Governor, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I was with the governor today during that video telephone conference with the President of the United States. I was very surprised of the forcefulness in the words he used, but that's not the Connecticut way, is it? And being a police chief in Hartford for 6 years, it's a different way with our community and our community policing, and we want to hear the grievances. We want to assist you when you protest. We want to make sure that you're safe when you do that, and we want to hear your grievances, even if you're grieving us. But in my position now, we have talked to all the major chiefs in the city, the state. We've talked to the Connecticut Chiefs of Police Association with the Colonel Malikas from the Connecticut State Police. And we feel very comfortable that we can handle these protests and keep moving and keep them orderly. And we hope that the violence or looting or the burning doesn't occur here that has occurred elsewhere. And that's our mission. To keep those protests safe. I do have to add a cautionary word, though. Those highways are very dangerous places. They're very dangerous places for the protesters. They're dangerous places for the pedestrians that are coming up there, for the motorists, for the troopers that have to stop traffic, for our Department of Transportation people that assist us. If you have never stepped out on a highway when cars are whizzing by you at 75 miles per hour, don't do it. They make the car shake. Can you imagine what they can do to a human person? But we respect your right to protest.
News 12 Connecticut. Fox 61.
Good afternoon. Governor Lamont, as the state's top official, what can you do from your office or even with the legislature to address some of the concerns that these protesters have and really people just have about the injustice that they're seeing?
Start by having an administration that reflects the diversity of the state. Make a special emphasis upon our state police and our municipal police forces. Make a special emphasis upon the judges and those that are, helping to mete out justice in a way that people have confidence that it's being done fairly and takes into account circumstance. I think that's the most important thing I can do. We talked today, Johanna, about diversity committee and other ways different voices can be at the table to make sure as we continue our policies, all voices are heard.
And just to follow up to that, Commissioner Revelle, do you think that something needs to be done on the legislative level, or do there need to be more policies in place between state police and local municipal police to make sure that these types of things don't happen?
On a couple different levels there, I'd like to make a few comments. First of all, On the state level, we do have several committees, several task forces, several groups that meet regularly. I'd encourage folks to come to the table to talk, because that's where our first beginnings are when we talk, and we understand where each other is coming from. I can't represent that I understand every need that you're telling me. I don't come from that atmosphere. I need to learn, and that's what we tried to do in Hartford, courageous conversations. So part of my assignments as a commissioner is the police officers in standard and training, along with the Connecticut State Police Academy. And we are really turning those into a dynamic, collegiate atmosphere with the Chiefs of Police Association and the Post Council. So that needs to be, folks need to come to the table there. That conversation could be very vivid. Recruiting, that is high on every police chief's list, including the state police. We recently started a class remotely. We were over 40%. We're just hovering just under 40 now, and we plan on bringing those people in. That is a huge recruiting aspect for law enforcement.
Can I just also say, to add to that question, because I've heard this over and over, and it came up on the last call that we had, people need to come to the table. Sometimes we have to take the table to the people. Our police departments can't just wait for people to come to the police department looking for a job. They have to go into the communities looking for those people, to engage young people much earlier, to help them to imagine themselves in a career in law enforcement, to put them once again in proximity where they can ask questions of local police officers, different things. We talked about in Waterbury, they had the PAL program where many young kids engage with officers very early. But this idea that, again, people coming to the table will never happen as long as there is that sense of mistrust. There are so many young people who wouldn't even consider a career in law enforcement because their idea of who police are and how police operate in communities is something that they're not sure they fit into. So I think we have to be a lot more creative about engaging people, not just saying we're having a recruitment fair, come to us, but going out into communities, educating people, having people be part of the much larger conversation and a part of any changes that are going to be made. Because again, you can't just tell people this is what we're doing and you're invited to join if there's no buy-in or there's no investment.
Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
Yes, a question for Commissioner Ravella. You know, locally we've been seeing these protests remain peaceful, but other states have needed to call in the National Guard. What would we need to see on the ground here in Connecticut to warrant that move?
So my job is to look through, not only from day one, it's to look through day 100 if we have to go that far. And how do we plan and how do we project for different things that may occur? Our protest has been generally peaceful. There's been some altercations at the front doors of police departments, or there's been some arrests in different areas. And we're gauging that as we go. I'm next door at the EOC, part of the management team for the COVID with Emergency Management and Homeland Security, and I sit with General Yvonne from the National Guard. We have had conversations about what it would look like in the future if they got as worse as places like California, LA, or Minneapolis. We've had those conversations and we're prepared for them, but right now neither one of us see the benefit of that, but they're on our horizon if needed.
Hearst, Connecticut Media.
Thanks, Max. Hey, Governor, it seems like the president is dividing the nation into dominators and jerks. Is this an apparent election ploy on his part? He's turning this civil strife into some kind of campaign issue?
God, I hope not. I can't think of anything more cynical than that. But, you know, we had demonstrations, and Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King were assassinated, and law and order and Dick Nixon got elected. So it does play into the body politic. I'm old enough to remember those days. But I do think, broadly speaking, militarizing this situation is not the way to go. That James Ravella, the state police, working with the municipal police, working with the community leaders, working with demonstrators who are standing up and, by and large, doing the right thing in a peaceful way. That's the Connecticut way.
And Governor, you were talking about the 1,981 deaths. Are those all hospital deaths, or are they hospital and nursing homes, or can we assume that, I mean, it's half the total deaths, so of the 1981 adding up to the 3964, I mean, does that,
What that, Josh?
does 1981 include nursing homes?
No, those are just people who passed away while admitted into our acute care hospital. So it does not include people who passed away in a nursing home, people who passed away at their own home or any other facility.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Hartford Current.
Hi, Governor. So one thing that has clearly bothered protesters everywhere is not only George Floyd's death, but also the fact that it took a while for there to be accountability for the officers who were responsible for it. So my question for you is, what steps have you taken or can you take to ensure that if something like that does happen in Connecticut, that there will be accountability promptly and appropriately?
Paul, do you want to take that?
Yeah. How are you doing? Paul Mounts here. So the governor signed a bill during the last legislative session dealing with police accountability that provided a whole process to make sure that there's expedient overview as well as response as it deals with situations of like this ever occurred here in Connecticut. I know Commissioner Ravella has talked about particularly about that particular chokehold or maneuver that was utilized in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and that's something that is not taught to Connecticut police officers through POST, which Commissioner Ravella leads under his department. As the governor stated, we're continuously going to be out with the community, whether it's pastors, members of the Black and Puerto Rican caucus of the legislature, all Connecticut citizens. I think the one thing that we have seen is that there's been all Connecticut citizens from all walks of life who have come out to peacefully protest what has gone on not only in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but in terms of concerns and issues of injustices that have faced people of color for generations. As the governor stated, this is an administration that wants to not only work on these issues, but thrive on these issues, and we'll continue to do so, working with all partners.
Then I also have a COVID question, which is, I think one reason that people are a little confused about who should be tested is that you guys have said that the problem is a lack of patients showing up to be tested. And I know the testing numbers have not sort of continually gone up. But then on the other hand, there are still restrictions on who should be tested. So people, I think, are a little confused. Well, if you're looking for people to go get tested, why can't I go get tested? And so how do you kind of square those two things?
Why don't you take that, Josh?
Sure. So as I think people appreciate, we don't have unlimited testing capacity. We have a lot more capacity than we're utilizing right now, and we're continuing to build that. But we do have to follow a focused strategy. And so the strategy the governor laid out in our reopen plan is designed really to minimize the public health risk. So that starts with where the governor said, everyone who has any symptoms, get tested. Anyone who's had contact with those people, get tested. And then you go into a very focused list that we want to prioritize. And we're taking a big move on that list today. The governor later today will be issuing an executive order requiring all nursing home staff and assisted living facility staff to be tested on a weekly basis, phased in over this month. And so, as you can anticipate, that will consume a significant amount of our testing capacity. We've been working with the nursing homes to ramp that up, and some of them have started to do that, but we're now going to make that a requirement given how hard those facilities have been hit. But we will be one of the first states in the nation. There's been a few others, but we'll be among the first to require that now on a weekly basis, given that that is really going to be so critical to protecting our most vulnerable citizens going forward. But so you go down this priority list, and we'll use all the capacity going forward. And then as we build more capacity, we can continue to add more people that can be tested regularly.
Thank you.
CT News Junkie.
Thanks. So my question goes to police accountability. So I don't know who wants to take it. But Governor, how are you proposing? I know we passed the 2019 legislation. Under that 2019 legislation, the Police Transparency and Accountability Task Force that was created met only once in January. And also, the police contract that was approved by the legislature allows the police to hide investigations and their personnel records. So how would you go about changing police accountability?
Well, I can leave this to one of you too, but I'll just say broadly, Christine, I've always believed in the maxim, justice delayed is justice denied. And I know, given COVID, there have been some delays in the court system and the such, but I want to do everything I can to make sure that we hold people accountable on a timely basis, and people can see it on a pure transparency, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we hold people accountable. Do you want to add to that, either of you?
Sure. Let me speak a little bit about accountability, and it runs very closely with transparency, and it also runs very closely with training and how we embed ourselves into the communities, and how we act, and how we police ourselves, and how we're policed by others, right? You have a new chief state's attorney, and I've had several conversations with him about how do we investigate officer-involved shootings, and so there's that impartiality to it. These chiefs of police out there are very, very eager to show that transparency. So is the post council. They're very eager to show how we train and what we do there. Now, you had one question in there. We're not hiding files. You're referring to the Connecticut State Police contract that actually takes those non-sustained complaints and they are not released. And that was embedded into a contract, and Colonel Malikas and I have very little to do with that.
Okay, I mean, Governor, going forward, should that be something that is taken out of the police contract, which is up in 2 years?
Perhaps. Let me take a look at that, Christine.
Okay, thank you.
WTIC 1080 News.
For Commissioner Rivera, we've all watched the last few days as reporters have been shot in the face by rubber bullets, police and military firing tear gas at generally peaceful protesters. What are the procedures in place here so that if there was a standoff of some sort, that the innocent people and media wouldn't get hit?
So part of my job is respect freedom of speech. So far you've seen in front of places like Bridgeport and New Haven, the only use of force was pepper spray. That was the only use of force in those areas. There was some hands-on in Waterbury, which resulted in arrests, and the state police arrested 2 on the highway. Really, we're there to protect the public and not let them get harmed, nor let anybody else harm them. That was my cue about folks being up on the highway. That's a very dangerous place. Those are last resort measures that you've referred to, either gas or pellets or other use of force methods. Those are very last resorts and haven't even come to bear in our cities yet, nor do I want them to.
You said you were very surprised.
Can I just jump in real on that issue? Because I think that contrast is what so many people, there's this conflicting reality, because many people who went out to protest peacefully were confronted with rubber bullets or tear gas or just the protest being broken up. And again, we watched it play out on the news, and this wasn't in our state, but where we saw in Michigan where armed protesters showed up at the governor's, and just the response. So we have to make sure that we are equitable in the distribution of protecting people's First Amendment rights. I mean, even though these things are happening all over the country, those are the images that people leave their houses with. Those are the things that are playing out in our communities, where people just expect that I will not be afforded the same rights and opportunities to voice my opinions in the same way. So again, we respect people's right to protest, but that should look exactly the same no matter what community it's in. Because if we're being honest about it, if we saw on TV a group of armed people with black that showed up with assault rifles to the state house in Michigan, I imagine that would have played out in a very different way. And those are the images that people see. And that's why people are concerned about if those freedoms are being equitably protected.
Thank you. Does this, the commissioner said he was very surprised by the comportment of the president on the call. Congresswoman, does this president have the comportment to be able to handle this situation? That's what everyone's asking.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the president, but what I do know as a history teacher is, I mean, everybody knows we don't live in a dictatorship, and the citizenry is much larger than any office that we hold. So I think people have to hold leaders accountable. Leadership starts at the top. Right now, we need people who at least have the empathy and the understanding to confront some of the hurt or to receive the hurt that is happening in our communities. I have not seen that coming out of the White House. But what I have seen is where local leaders, community members, elected officials, and just regular people have taken it upon themselves to say, you know what, it's up to us to help our nation heal and to turn the tables here. And that's what we see people doing. I am not happy with the response that I've seen. I'm old enough to have gone through crisis with presidents on both Democratic and Republican presidents. And at the times when our nation is hurting, our leaders should be there to guide us, to lead us, to at least offer comforting words. And that's something that I think is lacking right now. So for what I can do, I've tried to reach out to my constituents. I see other people who are not elected officials doing the same thing. And I think that the people will be the ultimate gauge, set to recalibrate our moral compass here.
Waterbury Republican American.
Thanks, Max. Governor, I see today that the lawsuit that the federal lawsuit that the ACLU filed over on behalf of inmates seeking protections from COVID-19 while incarcerated, it's been assigned to a magistrate for a settlement conference. Can you give us any kind of update on what's happening on that issue?
You have the update on that?
As you know, it's pending litigation at this time, but the information that you have stated is currently correct, and we're going through that legal process. I know that we're going to have some more data that's going to come out of the Department of Corrections tomorrow that's going to show the progress that has been happening on all of the various fronts dealing with DOC and the response on COVID. So we'll have more information on those particular numbers tomorrow.
And regarding today's report, you guys are now, or the state is now breaking down tests by confirmed and probable, and the same issue with deaths. Could someone speak to a little bit regarding this change and whether or not, say, for instance, the 2,070 probable cases are awaiting test results, and that's why they're probable, or they're not going to get tested?
Yeah, so I can take this one. So we, as you may know, we were one of the first states to begin reporting deaths that were likely associated with COVID, even if a test had not been performed, given the symptoms, and our chief medical examiner has been leading in that regard. Many other states have also followed, and other states have been criticized for not doing that, but Connecticut was one of the early ones to do so. The CDC has put out some recent guidelines that just specify that they want those numbers specifically split out for each state, so we've aligned our reporting accordingly, but we've been reporting those probable cases for weeks now, so there's no change in the overall numbers. We're just splitting out the existing data.
And there are people out there that are looking at the data and questioning whether or not the government and the news media are manipulating it or overplaying anything. What would you say to folks who look at, deaths, for instance, as probable versus confirmed and say, aha, there you go. These guys are making it look worse than it is.
I think you can look at...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Governor. I think you can look at the total number of deaths, which our chief medical examiner reports, and see this year is not like any other year, not by a long shot. And I think what I'm hearing more commonly is accusations that other states are downplaying the real impact on those states, whereas Connecticut's being straightforward and transparent about the real impacts of COVID on this state so that we can take the appropriate actions to try to contain the public health risk and prevent future loss of life.
They are playing games, or let's say a lack of clarity in terms of definitions of a COVID-related death. We've been very clear in this state. One of the ways, Paul, that they're evaluating now is they see what the excess fatality is for our last 3 months compared to, say, comparable 3-month periods in years past. And I think you'll find in Connecticut those numbers are pretty close in terms of tracking our COVID-related fatalities with the excess. In other states, that's not true, and that's what the feds are trying to get a hold of.
We'll move along next to the Connecticut Mirror.
Good afternoon. Governor, you listened to that Zoom call for 90 minutes in Waterbury, and Representative Butler talked about a specific agenda, the need for a specific agenda. He mentioned more minority judges, economic development in the cities, reentry programs, restoration of voter rights, and so forth. Do you have plans to put forward legislation in the wake of the George Floyd death?
Well, I don't know if we need legislation. Let me look into that, Paz. But I do think I agree totally with what Larry Butler said. We're going to widen our search when it comes to judges. I was a little surprised by lack of diversity, especially in the higher courts. When it comes to economic development, as you know, we put in place a very specific set-aside program for women and minority-owned companies to make sure that they get that leg up and opportunity there. We made a special emphasis to make sure those women and minority-owned companies got a place at the table, Johanna, when it came to the PPP loans and the emergency loans. And we made a big effort to make sure that nobody would be left behind there. If there's other things we need to do via legislation, I'm ready to look at it. But we're doing everything we can via our executive authority right now.
The Kerner Commission 52 years ago put the riots in the context of the United States' failure to address racism and poverty, which obviously is a very sweeping conclusion. But it did point to the need to do other things other than listening to people's grievances. I know it's early, but again, you don't seem to have any thoughts on specific legislation or specific things that the state of Connecticut should do to address poverty and racism.
Well, I don't subscribe to your precedent of that question. I think we have very clear ideas of what we want to do. It starts with education and making sure nobody's left behind. It starts with making sure that our distressed districts get a special leg up. Make sure each and every one of those kids can go. Make sure we have 60,000 laptops out there. Making sure that nobody's on the wrong side of the digital divide. It means when it comes to a business, it means you get a fair shot at being able to start your own business. It means raising the minimum wage every year for the next 4 or 5 years. So these minimum wage workers we now realize are essential workers, and they are going to be lifted up, and then that's tied to cost of living going forward. We've learned a lot about health care and health care disparities, and we've expanded Medicaid in a dramatic way to make sure more people are covered every day, because we know how health care can impact people's family situations. So I think we're doing a lot within the context of growing our economy and making sure that nobody is left behind.
Thank you.
Boceto Media. The Day of New London.
Hello, Governor. I wanted to ask regarding the COVID-19 alerts that have been placed on the approaches to the casinos. You had said last week that you would put those in place if the casino's advisories about COVID risks were not strict enough. So the question is, what about their advisories? Did you find lacking, and can they be corrected? And will these alerts remain in place, or is there something that casinos, some steps they could take that would lead you to remove them?
Well, I'll start and then pass it to Paul. Yeah, I wanted to be fairly strict on a number of things. As you know, we have a advisory out that's clear. People over the age of 65 should not be in large congregate settings. We think that's dangerous even now. Stay safe, stay at home is our priority. So, yep, we did. We put electronic billboards up there saying, don't gamble, over 65, don't gamble with your health. And it's not just your health, it's the health of everybody you live with as well. So, yep, we tried to put some good, strong advice in place as people are on their way taking a gamble.
And I'll add, the governor had a call with both chairmen of the tribes on Friday to reiterate his concern about their opening on June 1st, and followed that up with a letter in response to their specific plans. While both of the casinos made considerable steps to reach what our team from DSS, Department of Economic Community Development, and Department of Consumer Protection provided as guidance and direction to be in adherence to what the state is doing, the governor felt that it was important to continue to put the guidelines out and overall warnings about the concerns dealing with the health of Connecticut citizens as it deals with the COVID crisis. With that said, we're going to continue to work with both of the tribal councils and with the casinos. We will be talking and meeting with them weekly about their particular plans. And as said, we're going based upon the guidance that we have from our health officials, and want to continue to work with them to make sure that their facilities are safe and will maintain safe for not only Connecticut but for the whole region.
So those alerts will stay in place indefinitely?
We are, as of right now, they are up.
Okay, thank you.
Connecticut Public Media.
Good afternoon. Today was the opening of hair salons since the pandemic shut them down. And the Connecticut Restaurants Association is wondering when they're going to be able to open for indoor dining. I talked to someone today, and they were pushing for June 3rd. Is that something that's possible, or is this a phase 2 thing where we'll see indoor dining?
I think June 3rd is too early for indoor dining. We introduced the outdoor dining, one of the first in the region to do that, on May 20th, and I think it's gone pretty well. But as you probably know, neither Massachusetts nor New York on either side of us have followed suit as yet. I think Massachusetts may be doing outdoor dining about now, and I think we'll be coordinating our indoor dining carefully over the course of the next few weeks.
So there's no even phase 2. Do you think that might be something that could happen on June 20th, or is that too soon as well?
No, right now indoor dining is, we're looking at June 20th, which is our next stage, and subject to, the testing, and subject to the metrics, and subject to how outdoor dining is going. We're going to get a little information in terms of the tribes as well, have some dining. We can look at Georgia, we can look at Alabama. They'll have a little more history there in terms of inside dining. You know, you're inside, you're a little close together, you don't have a mask on, so it's something we're doing cautiously, but we are going to do it.
The Associated Press.
Good afternoon, everyone. Governor, do you foresee Connecticut or some of the cities needing a curfew, given the protests?
I haven't seen that yet. I was asking Commissioner Ravella about that. I know a couple of the mayors have tossed it around. Obviously, it's better to have people inside, especially after nightfall. I don't think we have a need for that yet.
And regarding the COVID recovery homes, do we have any data yet in terms of how many people were transferred from hospitals into these homes, how many people have been transferred out of the homes back to their nursing homes, what the success rate was, and also how many do we have up and running now? How busy are they?
Sure. I'm just opening that file, but we've had, I think last time I looked, it was over 300 people had been transferred into those homes. And they've been, the model's been very successful. I think other states have looked at that model as one that was the right approach. Other states that had required transfers back into nursing homes have been heavily criticized for that. So we've now gone over, so 306 admissions, and 75 of those have already been discharged.
And all those 306 came from the hospitals, right? They weren't from transfers from another nursing home?
At least the vast majority of them were from hospitals. That's correct.
Okay. And do you know yet also the rate of death?
I don't have that here, but we can get that for you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Let me just say, Johanna and I were on the call with the ministers and legislative leaders and police in Waterbury, referenced a couple of times. I was struck by Larry Butler, who I found out is the exact same age as me, 14 years old, back during the Martin Luther King assassination, and soon thereafter Bobby Kennedy. And we thought maybe that was a turning point. What was it, 25 years later, Rodney King. Why can't we all get along? They're in L.A. We thought that might be a turning point. And now we've got George Floyd, another 30 years later. And one of the ministers, Pastor Reese, wasn't it, Johanna, said, look, every day you do a little bit better. Every day you try and make today better than yesterday and the day before that. And I think that's what we're going to take from this message and what we hear from the protests and the frustration and how long it's taking and how uneven the arc of justice is, and you fight every day. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being with us, Johanna.
Thank you, Governor Lamont. But just a reminder, it cannot just be the Black pastors and the people in those communities. It has to be everybody engaged in this conversation. Lots of places don't have an elected official who identifies as African American or large Black congregations. But I think it really is going to take everybody saying, how do I become a part of this conversation and how do we work together? We can't just leave it on the shoulders of those in the Black community to be the drum majors on this conversation and continue to push it forward.
I'll be beating that drum. Thanks, everybody.